Have you ever felt invisible, overlooked, like your fears and insecurities are a cage locking you away from a life of purpose? What if the very things you see as your greatest weaknesses, the self-doubt, the anxiety, the feeling of being utterly ordinary, are precisely what God is looking for? This isn't just a story about a victory. It's a story about identity. It's the story of Gideon, a man whose resume read farmer and fugitive, but whom God addressed as mighty warrior. It's a masterclass in how heaven rewrites our stories, turning our hiding places into launching pads for miracles. To understand Gideon, you have to feel the weight of the world he lived in. For 7 long years, the shadow of the Midianites had fallen over Israel. They weren't just an army, they were a plague. Imagine the sound of terror, the thunder of hooves, the shouts of raiders, the silence of a stolen future. The Israelites were driven from their own homes, forced to live in mountain caves, watching generation after generation of their work and hope be systematically destroyed. And in the small, forgotten village of Ophrah, this despair had a name: Gideon, son of Joash. He wasn't a leader, he was a survivor, a simple farmer who knew his place, which was, in his own words, at the very bottom. My clan is the weakest, he would think, and I am the least in my family. He was a man defined by his limitations, but God specializes in interrupting the unacceptable. One ordinary day, Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress. Now, a winepress is a pit, a hollowed-out rock, meant for crushing grapes, not for threshing wheat. He was hiding down there, trying to salvage a few handfuls of grain from the raiders, the very picture of fear and scarcity. And then, a presence, a stranger, sitting under the nearby oak tree, not a soldier, not a kinsman, a man whose very calm was unsettling, and his words cut through the dust and fear. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." The title felt like a cruel joke. Mighty warrior? Gideon's response wasn't polite faith, it was raw, honest frustration. "Excuse me, my lord," he retorted. "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? Where are all the miracles our fathers told us about? He has abandoned us." Then came the reply that would change everything. The stranger looked straight at him, past the fear, past the doubt, and saw the man he was created to be. "Go in the strength you have," he commanded, "and save Israel. I am sending you." And Gideon's response is so beautifully, painfully human. The grand calling crashes into his small self-image. "But how can I? My clan is the weakest, and I am the least." His identity as the least was the prison he couldn't escape. God's answer was the key: "I will be with you." Even with a divine promise, Gideon was terrified. Faith wasn't a switch he could flip, it was a flame that needed to be kindled. So he asked for a sign. "If I have found favor, show me a miracle." He brought his offering. The angel of the Lord touched it with his staff, and fire blazed from the rock, consuming it entirely. In that moment Gideon knew this was no mere man. He had been speaking with God, and his fear turned to awe. "I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But awe in a moment is one thing. Obedience the next day is another. That very night, God gave him a dangerous personal mission: tear down his own father's altar to Baal and the Asherah pole beside it. This wasn't a distant battle. This was a confrontation in his own backyard. He obeyed, but he did it under the cover of darkness, too afraid of his neighbors and his own family to be seen. And when the town discovered it was him, they wanted him dead. But his father, Joash, delivered a line of brilliant, defiant wisdom. If Baal is really a god, he can defend himself. Still, the doubt whispered. The enemy army was still out there. So Gideon laid out a fleece, a test. Lord, let the fleece be wet with dew and the ground dry. And God, in incredible grace, did it. But fear is a stubborn enemy. Don't be angry, Gideon prayed. Let me test just one more time. Let the fleece be dry and the ground be wet. And once again God condescended to his struggling servant. The fleece was dry as bone. Now faith had taken root. Gideon sounded the call, and the response was overwhelming. 32,000 men gathered, a formidable army. Finally, a force to be reckoned with. But then God delivered a bombshell. You have too many men. Too many? This defied all human logic. But God's reason was profound. I will not let Israel boast over me, saying, my own hand has saved me. The victory had to be undeniably his. So Gideon offered a discharge to anyone who was afraid. And 22,000 men, nearly 70% of the army, turned and went home. The camp must have felt desperately empty. But God said, there are still too many. The next test was at the water. Most of the men knelt down, putting their faces to the stream, forgetting the enemy, forgetting the mission, for a moment of refreshment. But a small group, only 300, remained alert. They brought the water to their mouths with their hands, lapping it like dogs, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. These were the ones, the vigilant, the ones who understood the stakes. 300 men, against an enemy described as numerous as locusts. Humanly speaking, it was a suicide mission. But divinely speaking, it was the perfect setup for a miracle. God's battle plan was as unconventional as his army. No swords, no grand charge. Just trumpets, torches hidden inside clay jars, and a shout. In the dead of night they took their positions, surrounding the vast, sleeping Midianite camp. The silence was heavy, thick with tension. Every one of those 300 hearts must have been pounding like a drum. Then Gideon gave the signal. In a single explosive moment, 300 trumpets shattered the silence. 300 clay jars were smashed on the rocks, a cacophony of shattering pottery. 300 torches were thrust into the air, creating a sudden, terrifying ring of fire on the hills. And 300 voices roared in unison. A sword for the Lord and for Gideon. The Lord himself sowed confusion among them. The vast army turned on itself, swinging swords in the darkness at phantoms created by light and sound. Gideon's 300 men never drew a weapon. They simply stood their ground, their faith now made sight, and watched as God fought their battle for them. The victory was stunning, complete. A grateful nation, freed from a decade of terror, turned to Gideon. Rule over us, they cried, you and your son, and your grandson after you. The temptation of a dynasty was laid at his feet. And here, Gideon shines with profound humility. I will not rule over you, he declares. The Lord will rule over you. He refused the crown. He understood the source of his victory. But then he made a request, a seemingly harmless one. He asked for the gold earrings from the plunder. And with it he made an ephod, a sacred priestly garment. It began as a memorial, a physical reminder of God's incredible deliverance. But slowly, Subtly, the memorial became an idol. The object that was meant to point people to God began to distract them from God. They started to worship the thing instead of the one it represented. It's a tragic warning tale. After 40 years of peace under Gideon's judgment, his legacy was tarnished. And upon his death, the cycle of sin returned with a vengeance. His son, Abimelech, a product of this new era of ambition, murdered his 70 brothers to seize a throne his father had rightly refused. So what does Gideon's roller coaster story say to us today? God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. Your feelings of inadequacy aren't a disqualification. They are an invitation for God to demonstrate His power. God is not offended by our honest doubts. He meets us in them, patiently building our trust, one step, one fleece, one act of obedience at a time. Our role isn't to muster enough strength to win the battle, but to have enough faith to obey the commander. The outcome belongs to Him. The greatest dangers aren't always the obvious sins. They can be the good things, a ministry, a memory, a success, that we allow to take the central place that belongs to God alone. Gideon's story is for every one of us who has ever felt too small, too scared, or too scarred to be used for something great. It's a call to trust the one who sees the mighty warrior inside the trembling heart, to step out of our hiding places and into His purpose, to obey even when it seems foolish, and to always, always give Him all the glory. If this story of doubt turned to deliverance resonated with you, if it reminded you that your story isn't over yet, then share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below on which part impacted you the most, and subscribe to the channel, because next week we're diving into another incredible story of faith under pressure. Until then, walk in the confidence that the same God who was with Gideon is with you. Thanks for watching.